when the orphanage in Montrose County was destroyed by fire. 14 small beds were found in the ashes, but no remains. Not a single child from Sister Eleanor's home was ever officially registered as alive. Their faces appeared on icons, in letters, in the ashes, but no one knew who they were, and no one knew why they were taught to stay silent, not to blink, and never to live past 18. Some say they were chosen, others say they were victims. But then why were there 14 identical coffins in the basement, empty? In the early months of 1871, deep within the rural isolation of Montrose County, Illinois, stood a structure that many passed without thought. It was a low stone building nestled between two wooded hills, removed from the main roads and nearly invisible through the fog that often rolled down from the tree lines. A rusted iron sign hung above the gate, House of Mercy, under the protection of Saint Eleanor. The building itself resembled a church, but with no steeple, no visible cross, and no parishioners. Photographs of the place were rare, but one had survived. In it stood a group of women in austere black garments, her face hard to distinguish due to a crack running vertically down the glass plate. Surrounding her were children. Their number was difficult to determine, their figures blurred slightly, as if the exposure had captured only part of them. Still, each of them faced the camera directly, eyes fixed and unblinking, as if caught mid-thought. None smiled. Locals referred to the building as an orphanage. Some called it a convent, though no bells ever rang from its roof. A faded article in the Montrose Tribune described it as a Catholic-sponsored home for unwanted children, but no official records tied the church to the property. The children who lived there, if they truly lived there, and never attended the local school. Their names did not appear in census books. There were no records of adoption, baptism, or birth certificates. Teachers in the county reported never meeting any of them, though a few once recalled seeing dark shapes watching from the hill when they passed by on horseback. The townspeople accepted the presence of the building much as they did the forests or the storm, silent and immutable. Occasionally, supply wagons were seen heading up the gravel path, but no drivers lingered long. They spoke of an oppressive quiet that descended near the house, a heaviness that dulled the sound of horse hooves and made the air taste of iron. Residents who lived closest to the hills said they could hear distant singing at dawn, soft, choral tones that always began before the sun broke the horizon. It was not hymns they recognized, though it had the cadence of prayer. The singing stopped abruptly at first light, as if severed mid-note. In the evenings, there was only silence. Not even crickets sang near that stretch of land. Sister Eleanor, as she was called, was never seen in town. No one recalled her arriving, nor could anyone remember her ever leaving. A few elderly residents, many years later, would claim she had always been there, though they admitted they could not name her predecessor. Her clothing bore a resemblance to Benedictine garb, but lacked the usual symbols or embroidery. Her veil was always drawn low over her forehead, and she appeared in public only once at the funeral of a local priest, where she stood silently at the back, her hands folded, and left before the final hymn was sung. Rumors gathered like moss on the stones of the house. Some said the children inside were deaf or mute, which explained their absence from school. Others believed it to be a home for the mentally infirm, or a sanatorium of some kind. But there were stranger stories to whispers that the same children had been seen over decades, unchanged in age, walking through the woods behind the property. One man swore he'd seen a girl in a white sash, watching him from the same spot beneath a sycamore tree every spring for 5 years. He left Montrose in 1881 and never returned. A group of missionaries once attempted to visit the home unannounced. They did not reach the building. One of them later wrote in a letter that their horses refused to climb the final slope, and that the trees seemed to close in on the trail. He described a sudden wind, though the air had been still moments before, and a sound like weeping carry on it. They turned back before sunset. The House of Mercy, despite its ominous isolation, was never the subject of official investigation. The sheriff at the time maintained that no complaints had been filed, and that God's work took many forms. Still, children in Montrose were warned not to wander near the hills. They told stories in secret, stories of pale hands reaching from windows, of eyes behind curtains that never blinked. Some claimed to have seen candles burning inside during nights when no one should have been awake. Church records from the period are curiously incomplete. In several volumes, a Sister Eleanor is listed as a visiting cleric in 3 different parishes between 1869 and 1893. Each entry is brief, lacking detail. The handwriting varies, as if different people wrote the name with different familiarity. Yet in every entry, the title remained the Semi-Custos Domus Misericordia, or Keeper of the House of Mercy. Perhaps the most chilling detail was not found in any registry, but in a photograph uncovered decades later, in the attic of a long-abandoned courthouse. It showed the same woman in black, standing before the stone building, flanked by children. The year was stamped on the back, 1893, but a nearly identical photograph, with the same woman, the same children, and the same building, bore a different stamp, 1871. No one could explain the lack of difference. The children appeared unchanged. Their clothing matched exactly, the positions of their hands, the placement of their feet identical. Only the cracks in the photograph surface differed. It was as if time had not passed for any of them. Neighbors, when questioned years later, could only shake their heads. They kept to themselves. One elderly woman said, "Didn't cause trouble, but something about that play seat made the dogs howl, and no birds ever perched on the roof." The House of Mercy was never officially closed. No document recorded its disbandment, and yet, by the start of the new century, it had vanished from public mention. A few stones remain at the top of the hill where it once stood. Some are scorched, some are marked with symbols no one recognizes. But when wind moves through the ruins at dawn, locals say it still carries the sound of faint, distant singing. Not long after whispers about the House of Mercy began to fade into the background of Montrose's quiet life, oddities began to surface as subtle at first, then gathering weight. The first reports came from the local schoolhouse, though the children of Sister Eleanor were never enrolled. Once every few months, a group of them would arrive unannounced, always in pairs, always silent. They brought with them papers and writing instruments and Saturday without instruction, answering questions no one had asked. A teacher, Miss Greeley, preserved fragments of these moments in letters later donated to the town archive. In one she wrote, "They would not speak, not even when called by name, and though the test was arithmetic or state geography, every page came back filled with passages from Leviticus or Numbers. The handwriting uniform, no errors, no hesitation. Attempts to engage them led nowhere. When dismissed, the children would leave as they had come, walking in straight lines across the frost-laced fields, shoes never muddy, clothes untouched by wind. No one saw them arrive, and no one saw them go." Miss Greeley eventually refused to open the door when she heard their knock. Soon, farmers from the surrounding properties began to complain of livestock vanishing. At first it was chickens, then goats, and eventually entire calves, taken from locked barns without signs of struggle. One farmer found the remains of a sheep laid out in concentric circles, bones stripped and arranged with deliberate precision. Another reported his well had gone dry overnight, only to refill days later with water that smelled of burnt hair. Teenagers from the town, drawn by the rumors, claimed to have seen figures at night near the Franzine pond south of the hill. Always children, always wearing pale ribbons at their throats. Some said they never blinked. One boy insisted their eyes reflected no light. Another dared to approach them once and collapsed on the edge of the water. Unconscious, when he woke, could not remember the encounter, But for weeks afterward, he scratched at his arms until they bled, muttering in Latin phrases no one taught him. The dogs in Montrose began to change as well. They refused to go near the forest paths that led to the hill. Howled for hours at dusk, staring toward the woods as if sensing movement no human could see. One family found their hunting dog hanging from a tree outside their barn. No rope, no visible injury, just lifeless, its eyes wide open, tongue drawn back unnaturally. The sheriff said it must have been a predator, but the body showed no wounds. Portraits of the children, once dismissed as curiosities, took on a more troubling tone. In each, the subjects were unnervingly similar, same pale expressions, same tightly drawn lips, same white ribbon tied neatly at the base of the throat. Even the folds of their clothing seemed duplicated. Residents noticed that the same pair, a boy and a girl, appeared in several images said to have been taken years apart. A merchant passing through from Indiana swore he recognized one of them, claiming he had seen the exact face in a church painting in Evansville. When questioned, the priest of that church confirmed there was such a painting. An anonymous donor's gift dated 1864. It showed a child kneeling in prayer. The resemblance, when compared side by side with the photograph, was undeniable. Then came the suicide. George Mallory, a quiet man who owned a dairy farm 2 miles from the House of Mercy, was found hanging from the rafters of his own barn. No signs of struggle, no prior warnings. He left only a single note, scrawled in charcoal on the side of an empty milk crate. "They watch me again, through the glass. I was not supposed to look back," his widow claimed. He had grown increasingly paranoid in the months before, insisting that children had been watching him through the windows at night, always standing still, never knocking, never speaking. She thought it was madness. But on the morning of his funeral, all 4 of their cows were found dead in the pasture, eyes wide, tongues missing. Other farmers, now alert to the growing pattern, began to nail shut their windows and salt the edges of their fields. At the town's only general store, Bibles and crucifixes sold out in a single week. A minister from the neighboring county came to deliver a sermon of protection. During his visit, a strange item appeared in the offering basket, a small portrait, no larger than a coin, depicting a boy with empty eyes and a white ribbon. No one claimed to have placed it there. No one recognized the face. A family passing through Montrose on their way to Missouri stayed a single night in a rented cottage on the outskirts of the county. The next morning, they left before dawn. The father, shaken and pale, reportedly told the innkeeper, "We saw them by the trees." One smiled. That cottage remained vacant for years afterward. Perhaps most disturbing of all was what was found in the attic of Reverend Sampson's home. A county over, the Reverend had never been to Montrose. He had no known contact with anyone from the region. Yet while clearing out old furniture, his wife uncovered a framed photograph tucked behind a false panel. It showed a young girl, arms folded, standing in front of a plain stone wall, a white ribbon at her neck. When questioned, the Reverend insisted he had never seen the photograph before, and yet, when shown the image of the girl from the House of Mercy archives, he grew visibly pale and whispered, "I know this face. I've dreamed it for years." The Reverend was later admitted to a sanitarium after suffering a prolonged nervous collapse. Children in Montrose began having nightmares. They spoke of a sister in the floorboards, of rooms under the house, and of a bell that rang only when you closed your eyes. One boy claimed that every time he blinked, the girl in the white ribbon got closer. His mother removed every mirror in their home. At some point, townsfolk stopped walking near the hill entirely. The old trail to the House of Mercy grew over with thorns and moss. But on certain mornings, especially in the fog, people claimed they could still hear footsteps, pairs of them moving down the slope in rhythm. No voices, just the sound of shoes against dirt, and always in twos. It began just after midnight, a red glow on the horizon, first mistaken for lightning behind the hills, then recognized for what it was: flames. The House of Mercy was burning. The sky above Montrose thickened with smoke as the alarm spread through town. By the time the volunteer fire brigade reached the edge of the woods, the fire had consumed most of the upper levels. The stone walls, blackened and cracked, groaned under the weight of the heat. Windows had shattered outward, casting fragments across the dead grass. No screams, no movement, no sound but the crackling of timber and the rush of wind feeding the blaze. What struck the firemen first was the silence. A building of that size, known to house children, should have been a scene of chaos, crying, shouting, bodies at windows. But there was only flame and the slow collapse of wooden rafters. They doused what they could, but the roof was gone within an hour. The upper floor soon followed. One wall crumbled inward, revealing a corridor lined with burned crucifixes, all turned upside down. When the flames were finally subdued by dawn, only the stone foundation remained. A single staircase, leading downward into the earth, was untouched by fire or falling debris. The rescuers hesitated. Then one of them descended with a lantern. What he found made him drop it. The cellar, spanning the length of the building, had not burned at all. The air was cold, still, almost damp. Lining the walls were 14 iron beds, bolted directly to the stone floor. No mattresses, no blankets, no personal belongings. Only the bare metal frames, evenly spaced, as if prepared for inspection. At the foot of each, small depressions in the dust marked where someone had stood bare feet. The prints were fresh, but there were no bodies, no signs of violence, no struggle. Along the back wall, scratched into the stone in crude, jagged lines, was a single message. The fireman who saw it never forgot the words, "Do not let the light in." He later said the letters looked as if they'd been carved not with tools, but with fingernails. Investigators found no trace of Sister Eleanor, nor any of the children said to be in her care. No records, no lists, no names. The only documents recovered from the ash were singed prayer cards and a torn page from the Book of Job. Authorities searched for survivors but found nothing. Strangely, no remains were discovered, no bones, no charred corpses, not even the scent of burning flesh. Newspapers covered the story briefly. Blaze destroys Hilltop Asylum. Read one headline. No casualties reported in mysterious church fire. A small paragraph mentioned that no children were ever registered at the school, nor was the house listed among diocesan properties. Church officials denied all affiliation. A bishop from Chicago issued a single statement: "We are not aware of such a community under our jurisdiction. No orders have been issued to that region in over 30 years. The incident might have ended there, written off as a strange local disaster until 3 weeks later, a girl was found wandering the forest near the site. She was discovered by a traveling merchant, barefoot and dressed in outdated wool garments. Her hair was matted, her skin pale, her neck marked by a faint red line where a ribbon might once have been tied. She didn't speak. When approached, she offered no resistance. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Brought into town, she was initially thought to be a survivor of the fire. A doctor examined her and determined she was not a child but a woman no younger than 20, but her size and demeanor suggested someone much younger. Her dress, carefully stitched but worn thin, bore a hidden pocket along the hem. Sewn into it was a fragment of parchment. On it, in fading ink, she was the last. She did not know she was meant to die. For days, she remained in a catatonic state, sitting motionless in the corner of the sheriff's office. Then, without warning, she began to hum a low, droning chant that none recognized. It continued for hours. Some claimed it was in Latin, others thought it was older. When night fell, she stood, walked to the window, and whispered a word no one caught. She was gone the next morning. No one saw her leave. The door had been locked from the outside. The merchant who had found her returned months later, looking for answers. He swore that in a village in northern Wisconsin, He had seen a mural in a church crypt, showing a group of children in white robes, standing in rows before a dark figure. In the front row, Kate claimed, was the girl. Her expression was identical. The priest told him the painting was nearly a century old, older than the House of Mercy. Rumors began to swell again. People said the girl had been seen walking along the edge of the burned hill, humming softly to herself. Others swore she had knocked on their door at night, asking to come in before vanishing into the fog. Children dreamed of her. Farmers claimed to see lights flickering beneath the ground where the cellar once lay. The iron beds had never been removed. The foundation of the house, though damaged, still stood. Over time, moss and ivy began to creep over it, but no one dared to build there. A developer proposed converting the site into a retreat for troubled youth. He was found days later, raving in a hotel room in Chicago, his arms covered in cuts that formed the same phrase found in the cellar, "Do not let the light in." After that, the hill was left untouched. Locals began referring to the fire as the hollowing, a phrase that never appeared in newspapers but somehow entered common speech. It was as if the house had not been destroyed, but emptied, hollowed out, stripped of meaning, yet echoing with presence. The sheriff who first responded to the fire retired early. He refused to speak of that night. When pressed, he would say only one thing: no one died in that fire, but something left it. Years later, a photograph surfaced in a private collection in St. Louis. It showed the interior of a stone basement, dated 1901. 14 iron beds, bare floor. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, a figure stood with her back to the camera, her posture stiff, hands at her sides, around her neck, the faint top line of a white ribbon. No one could explain how the photograph had been taken, or why the exposure time was perfect in total darkness. In a sealed box deep within the archives of the Archdiocese of Chicago, behind faded birth registers and brittle baptismal certificates, a single envelope was found. Its wax seal remained unbroken, though time had nearly erased the red insignia once pressed into it. It bore no official stamp, but a date August 12, 1887 and a return address in Boston. When opened, the letter revealed a desperate, frantic hand. The author, a parish priest named Thomas Kerwin, wrote not to a specific recipient, but to those who will understand. He warned of a woman, known to him only as Sister Eleanor, who had moved along the eastern seaboard under multiple aliases. Her appearance changed, sometimes older, sometimes younger, but her presence was always accompanied by silence, discipline, and a group of children with the same blank expressions. Kerwin described an encounter from years earlier at a coastal orphanage outside Salem. A visiting nun had asked to examine the children, requesting photographs of all new arrivals. She never stayed long, never spoke to the children in public, but after she left, the staff discovered something strange. Some of the photos developed incorrectly. In particular, a small handful of children appeared to have no reflection in mirrors, but in glass negatives. Their faces were dimmer, blurred, as though the camera could not fully capture them. Those were the children she selected. Those were the ones she took with her. Kerwin's letter ended with a final lie, almost illegible from smudge ink and water damage. They are not children. They are the waiting. Around the same time the letter was uncovered, a separate investigation into the remains of the Eleanor estate, overgrown and partially collapsed, revealed an underground room previously undocumented. A narrow tunnel beneath the rear of the cellar led to a sealed chamber. The doorway was marked with an unfamiliar symbol, 3 concentric circles intersected by a vertical line, carved deep into the stone. No one could identify its origin. Inside the room were shelves, warped with age, stacked with rotting books, Most were unreadable, devoured by mildew, or not by time. Several volumes remained intact, preserved by dryness and cold. These books were not written in any single language. Some pages contained Hebrew psalms, others bore Latin invocations, but most were composed in a script unknown to scholars, with strange, angular characters that repeated in symmetrical patterns. Linguists attempted translation but failed. A few pages appeared to offer structure, diagrams, symbols, sequences, rituals. Some pages bore headings that, when transcribed, translated to phrases like preparation of the vessel, voice without bone, and passage by reflection. One passage stood out, repeated across multiple books, as if it held central meaning. For the soul to return, the vessel must be hollow. Margins were marked with notations in different inks, some clearly added later. Scholars noticed recurring annotations next to certain diagrams. Preserve the ribbon, empty by age 7. If light is seen, begin again. As analysis of these texts spread among a discreet circle of researchers and clerics, a theory began to take shape on which few dared to voice. The children who lived under Sister Eleanor's care were not students. They were not wards or orphans in the conventional sense. They had been selected, not for their minds or talents, but for their forms, their physical shells, their sameness, their silence, their unyielding obedience. They were being cultivated and educated. Read, perhaps, to serve as containers. The books seemed to suggest a kind of displacement, an old belief found in rare occult writings, that a soul, once loosened from its original vessel, could be poured into another, but the process was delicate. The recipient had to be young, unmarked by sin or desire, and empty psychologically, spiritually for the transfer. One note, scribbled in a cramped hand, stated, "A child emptied of will has no barrier." The white ribbons that once adorned their necks took on new meaning. In multiple texts, similar bands were described as veils or seals, used to keep the body receptive before completion of the rite. If removed too soon, the body would reject the guest. In some cases, it might die. In others, it might remain animated, empty, directionless, a husk. Further evidence emerged from unrelated ecclesiastical records. A monastery in Belgium reported, in 1864, the disappearance of an entire novice class. The only item left behind was a photo of 12 children in matching robes, each with white ribbons around their necks. The photo bore a handwritten note, property of S. That a hospital in Quebec logged the arrival of a mute girl in 1895, who bore a branded mark on her shoulder, 3 circles intersected by a line. She died within days. The attending physician's report described severe dissociation and inability to detect heartbeat during physical exam, though the patient remained conscious. What these incidents suggested was that Eleanor's practices had existed long before Montrose, that her movements formed a pattern, her name a disguise, her mission continuous. One document, catalogued under private diocesan correspondence, referenced a dark covenant, a pact made centuries ago, perhaps during the late medieval period, involving a secretive sect whose members sought to extend existence beyond the boundaries of flesh. Their doctrine rejected the natural order of death. Instead, they pursued continuity through ritual incarnation, but not through their own children, through borrowed ones, reared in silence, groomed in obedience, made empty. An unnamed cardinal's letter dated 1911 offered a chilling conclusion. The woman known as Eleanor is not singular. She is a face worn by something older. Some speculated that the House of Mercy had been the final node, in a long line of such sanctuaries, that each sister was a continuation, a mask, that the fire had not destroyed the work but merely concluded one cycle. Evidence for this grew when identical iron bed frames, bolted to stone, were discovered in an abandoned orphanage near Crack. A hand-carved sign over the door bore a name, translated from Polish as the House of the Meek. None of this was made public. The church denied the authenticity of the documents, the artifacts, the books. Those who had studied the volumes too deeply withdrew from public life. One committed suicide, another was institutionalized after, claiming to hear voices whenever near old photographs. The Boston archivist who opened the 1887 letter disappeared 2 weeks later. His apartment was undisturbed. The only thing missing was a single archival box. And yet, rumors persisted. A childless couple in Iowa received a letter offering them guardianship of a quiet girl found wandering near an old train depot. No agency claimed authorship. Attached was a photograph, grainy, black and white, of a young girl staring blankly into the lens. Around her neck, a white ribbon. The couple declined. Later, they claimed the photo would not burn. The ruins of the House of Mercy remain untouched for decades. Its walls were never rebuilt, the site never repurposed, yet locals swore the place was far from lifeless. On countless nights, small flickers of candlelight appeared at the foundation's edge, as if someone laid silent vigil. Footprints in the soft earth would appear by morning, but they led nowhere, just a path that ended in the moonlit moss. No one ever found an actual candle, no wax trails, no evidence beyond the faint glow. Occasionally, a woman in black wandered onto the old dirt road that led past the ruins. Her antique gown fluttered as she moved, though the air was still. Her face remained hidden beneath a dark veil. Travelers passing by reported her silhouette as stooped but assured. She never spoke. She never acknowledged anyone. Some recounted glimpses of her standing at the road's bend, head tilted toward the old house, as though listening to a sound only she could hear. Then she would vanish into the surrounding trees. In 1967, a freelance journalist from Chicago decided to investigate the location. He brought film equipment, archival notes, and a deep skepticism. His colleagues later described him as determined, nearly obsessed. He set up a camera at the edge of the ruins at dusk and into the night. The next morning, his abandoned car was found by the road. His gear remained: camera, tripod, notebooks, but he was gone, as though he had walked into the darkness and never left. Weeks later, his film reels surfaced. From the first roll, only a single frame was still intact, a still of the crumbling stone walls, smudged with soot, taken at twilight. In the foreground stood the journalist, and behind him, a group of children, 4 boys, 3 girls. They faced the camera, unmoving, eyes vacant. At first glance, they looked like long-lost orphans, though their clothing was antiquated, something out of the early 20th century, dusted and worn. The children matched descriptions from earlier decades, the same white ribbon around their necks, their shoulders stiff, their gaze detached, but the frame offered no answer. It frowned the moment. The next frame, when the film advanced, showed only the journalist's back. The children were gone. No extras, no edit marks, no sign of tampering. The film ran out shortly after. The journalist himself was never seen again. His colleagues refused to speak, citing fear or superstition. The reels were locked away, stored in a vault in Chicago's news archive. Only a handful of officials had access, and none spoke publicly about the images. The religious institutions remained silent. Not a single diocese claimed Sister Eleanor as part of any official order. All inquiries submitted to Catholic, Episcopal, and even small independent sects returned with the same answer: no record, no memory. Her name, Eleanor, Sister, Saints, did not appear in any rosters or registries. It was as if she had never existed within recognized doctrine. Year after year, the old tales persisted: candlelight, shadows, sightings of children, stories of missing persons refusing to pass by the ruins, a family leaving their home after hearing a lullaby in their kitchen at midnight, the melody distinct, but no source ever found. Museums and collectors drew the lingering history closer. The State Historical Museum housed one of the more disturbing artifacts, a small metal icon depicting a veiled woman, surrounded by 14 shadowy silhouettes. The plaque beneath, etched in Latin, read, Mater Dolorosa ad perpetuum, Mother of Sorrows for eternity. The icon's origin remained unclear. It had appeared in a private donation. The donor would only state it had belonged to a believer who witnessed the vigil. Connoisseurs noted the artwork's craftsmanship as mid-19th century European, Italian, or French, yet the inclusion of 14 figures suggested an intentional alignment with Montrose's lost children. A professor of theology who examined it drew comparisons to Byzantine mourning icons, where the Mother of God is shown with multiple Christ children. While scholars debated the artwork's symbolism, none doubted its evocation of grief, multiplicity, and enduring pain. The icon became a center of quiet pilgrimage. Students, occultists, and believers of all stripes visited, some leaving flowers, others replicating the 14 silhouettes on scrap metal. Expeditions to the site continued. Paranormal investigators, folklorists, and even sociologists came and went. The results were uneven. Thermal cameras recorded anomalies near the foundation during midsummer nights. Pendulums swung without wind. EMF meters spiked near the collapsed basement entrance. Yet physical proof remained elusive. Soil samples failed to show human remains. No footprints led to hidden crypts. One investigator even reported finding a single white ribbon tangled in roots near the ruins, old, brittle, but unmistakably the same shade preserved in photographs. The ghost story permeated the psyche of the region. Local schools sometimes believed children prayed at the ruins, citing midnight circles with candles and whispered names. The names were never written down. A teacher recalled a student speaking of feeling watched by unseen children during field trips. The students' drawings were of ghostly kids in white ribbons beneath a moonlit sky. The teacher preserved them, though the originals vanished under murky circumstances, replaced only by copies sent to a state historian. Those who researched Sister Eleanor's legacy often fell prey to strange fates. Archivists reported nightmares of veiled women beside their beds. Many suffered technical malfunctions on devices. Film cameras stopped rolling when the viewfinder aligned with ruins. Audio recordings occasionally caught the faint echoes of children singing in perfect unison, though the microphones registered nothing when replayed. Yet the fire's paradoxical nature remained the most unsettling realization. By all measures, no one died in the blaze. There were no bodies, no charred remains, but interviews with early fire responders, so long since deceased, consistently recalled the absence of screams, the absence of commotion, and the feeling that something left deliberately. Calmly, it was as if the structure opened, emptied itself, and stood hollow and destroyed. The people of Montrose treated the site with a mix of reverence and fear. Many avoided it altogether. Some made the sign of the cross when passing. A handful claimed the ground was consecrated. haunted, or cursed, yet none attempted to remove it. Rumors suggested state officials once considered excavating or redeveloping the land, but plans were abandoned without explanation. Those proposals so disappeared from records as if never filed. As decades passed, curiosity shifted into myth. Storytellers recounted Sister Eleanor not as a nun, but as a figure in black, maternal specter tied to disappearance, sorrow, and disappearance of official memory. The House of Mercy became a focal point for stories about children kept from life, bodies kept empty, and souls still waiting for light. The legacy had never returned to peace. Instead, it turned inward, bearing the burden of unanswered questions, preserved in shadows, absent from time. The stones of the foundation prayed silently to the wind, to the mother in black, and to the 14 they once claimed. The final letter, arrived in the diocesan archives in 2004, folded into an ordinary folder alongside administrative paperwork. It was written by one of the former wards of the House of Mercy, dated March 12, 1921. In cramped and careful script, the author referred to herself not by name, but as Child 14. She described children under Sister Eleanor's care not as students or orphans, but as doors. Each spring, a ritual determined which door would open on that would allow something inside. One child would vanish, another would remain as a vessel. The letter explained that Sister Eleanor had told them they were necessary. She spoke of a wider world unprepared for what might come, at darker spirits, hungry beings who would seek human forms. The ritual, she said, maintained a fragile balance, keeping those beings contained. The children were taught prayers in ancient tongues, asked to project emptiness, to still their thoughts. They were given the white ribbons at the throat, as seals of conciliation and protection. Each child wore one, but only during the rite. The ritual took place on the spring equinox. In the cellar, beneath the iron beds, the eldest child would lie still, ribbon untied at dawn. A chant would rise through the cracked stone. Then the child would collapse. When morning came, the world above flowed as usual, but the new vessel someone else had taken residence. The letter claimed the process worked repeatedly over decades. 14 doors opened and closed, preserving some fragile barrier between life and a greater darkness. Sister Eleanor, the letter continued, believed in sacrificing it out of cruelty, but conviction. She had believed that without their sacrifice, many more would suffer. She had called it mercy. The final paragraphs were pleading. The author, once 14, begged anyone who found the letter to put the world on notice, but she admitted fear. Even now, she feared the watchers. She feared that if the chain was broken, the darkness would return in force. She asked for an end, but lacked the courage to find one. This letter, when verified against archive paper records and fountain ink analysis, proved genuine. Handwriting matched earlier photographs of notes tucked inside dresses. The paper matched margins cut from the same ledger books found in the underground chamber. Folklorists, historians, and even psychologists who examined the letter concluded it was not forget but disturbing enough that none volunteered to release their findings. And yet the question remained, who continued this after the House of Mercy burned in 1902? The rituals were not tied to a building. They were bound to Sister Eleanor's lineage or to her disciples. The letter hinted that younger women, perhaps recruited and trained, might have carried on the work in secret sanctuaries. In late winter 2022, a photograph surfaced in an Ohio elementary school yearbook, titled 14th Grade Special Group House of Holy Mercy. The image showed 14 students in identical uniforms. One boy stood at the edge of the line, apart, He stared blankly at the lens, expression unreadable. Around his neck, a white ribbon shimmered in the daylight. The caption baffled parents, teachers, and administrators. No such program officially existed. A digital forensic investigation found no anomalies, no signs of photo manipulation, no duplicated pixels, no apparent hoax. The ribbon appeared identical to those worn in the century-old portraits. Only the boy's look, distant and blank, made viewers uneasy. The photo was quietly removed from the published book, but lived on in copies and social media whispers. Some believed the new generation marked a resurgence. Others dismissed it as coincidence. But when the original letter and the photograph were evaluated side by side, the parallels were uncanny. 14 individuals, one blank, one sealed by a ribbon, one destined to vanish. In rural Ohio, a local pastor recalled the disappearance of his own nephew, 9-year-old Daniel Macabre, who vanished the week after the yearbooks printed. No trace was found. His uniform jacket was recovered near the school, but bore no sign that it had been worn. The boy's neck was clean of any ribbon marks. Reports also emerged of midnight gatherings in barns and old halls across the Midwest. A small group calling themselves Custodians of Mercy began to circulate handwritten pamphlets describing preservation rites and the importance of keeping the vessel's cycle active. No one knew their leaders. Their pamphlets quoted obscure passages from Sister Eleanor's books, their authenticity unverified, yet disturbing. It became impossible to ignore that the phenomenon had outlasted the House of Mercy. It had migrated, mutated, and possibly adapted to modern times. No longer confined to secret cellars in Illinois, it had spread through whispers and images, disguised by plausibility. The roles had changed, but the pattern remained. 14. Ribbons, blank eyes, disappearance. Historians began piecing together a timeline that connected Europe to America, small towns to cyberspace, photographs to pamphlets to nightmares. The cost of revealing the truth had been too high. Too many investigators had disappeared or broken, yet the question persisted. Is the pattern a cult? An occult lie? A psychological contagion, or a truth too terrible to name? Whatever the answer, the cycle did not appear to have ended. In 2025, a new photo emerged, this time. 15 figures, a row of children at a community center in rural Pennsylvania, all in plain clothing and one with a white ribbon around the throat. The caption read, "Spring Group." It was quickly taken down, but not before Down scenes captured and circulated it. The pattern endured, the doors remained sealed, and those who watched quietly wondered, who would be next?